Welcome to the panel, guys. Just before we get into it, I want you guys to just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do. And since Oliver's mic is already on, we will start with him.
Thank you very much. First of all, good evening to everyone. This is a wonderful, wonderful event, and I would like to give my respect and big up everyone. This has been absolutely superb. I've even learned some things in the previous two
So,
sessions. So, maximum respect to everyone. Really like it.
uh,
Um, so, what do I say quickly? I'm a native St. Mary man, so I'm a very proud son of St. Mary. I did migrate to the United States approximately 1980 during those very interesting 70s and early 80s. Attended school, as you say. I am a practicing attorney licensed in Florida, and I enjoy the immigration practice greatly. The vast majority of my work is immigration, and I deal with a lot of immigration issues pertaining to professionals, investors, entrepreneurs, scholars. I'm also a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, of which I am the chair of the local Customs and Border Protection Committee, which means that I liaise with the US government extensively on issues regarding entrance into the United States and issues for individuals who are trying to come in and maybe have problems at the airport. I have a lot of experience, have a very interesting series of cases I've handled over the years. As you can see by the gray here, I am probably the oldest one participating in this event by far. But nevertheless, I will do my best to bat as best as I can at the crease. And I look forward to this immensely. Thank you.
stepping up to the plate already, I think you're already doing a great job. So that's
Thank you.
that's up to the crease. We're already off to a great start.
Thank
All
you.
right, so over to Nadisha for her to give us a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Like Oliver said, this has been an amazing opportunity. And to be sharing the mic with the likes of Oliver, with a veteran in the field, is definitely an honor. So, my name is Nadisha Berry, as you would have heard. I migrated to Canada in 2017. In 2017, I'm from Clarendon. I went to Glenmuir High School and then the UWI. I wear many hats. So by day, I'm a HR professional. I am actually the leader in a nonprofit organization here in Toronto, Ontario, that serves immigrants. So when persons migrate and they need to settle, they need to navigate their way to start their new life in Canada. So I'm the HR in such organization. It's called Skills for Change. And I am also around the clock a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and a career coach. I've worked in Jamaica for many years as a human resource professional in different fields, different capacities. But the piece that I navigated the most was, as the bio mentioned, talent management. So navigating people in their careers, particularly for persons who want to get to the next level. So a lot of focus on leadership development and just excelling in whatever profession, helping people to figure out their next step. And I think that just merged beautifully with my interest in immigration. In most instances, when people want to leave, it's usually for a better life. And that better life usually comes in the form of my career. And so I think I'm a little bit offering the best of both worlds because I'm also a career professional and the immigration piece. So helping my clients navigate the do's and don'ts, the best practices in how to land their job and to move forward in their career when they get settled in Canada.
Awesome, love that. So I actually have a lot of friends who are from Glenmuir, and believe it or not, you're actually one of the first persons I've ever heard say I'm from Glenmuir and not put the "the" in front of it. So be like, I'm from the Glenmuir High School. But just to kind of kick off the conversation, I realized that transitioning your experience in human resource between Jamaica and also in Canada, how does the experience or what job searchers are looking for, how does it different in terms of what it is that you need to have, and how is that person can prepare for whenever it is that they get to that position of searching for jobs abroad with the intention of migrating?
Oh, well, that's a wonderful question. I think one of the things that persons have to recognize is that it's two different markets. And so the one size fits all strategy cannot work. It's a very different approach in an overseas market. When you're in Jamaica, you're competing locally. So it's a lot of the same, the same education, the same credentials, the same experience. and pretty much the same type of environment. Now, for international work, you're competing in a global market. And so, understanding the demands, understanding what the recruiters, the hiring managers are looking for is critical. Something that trips a lot of persons up is as simple as their resume. Some irrelevant information or information that does not meet the requirements of particular roles are put on the resume, and that screens them out because a lot of the recruiting is done online through applicant tracking systems. So an algorithm reads that resume before it gets to a human eye. And so from onset, a lot of resumes go to file 13, and it never gets to meet someone's eye. Another thing to bear in mind is that connections are the beginning of your careers in the international market. In Jamaica, we like to say is who know you, and links. Well, in the international market, and I think Jamaica is now adopting, networking is critical, and you want to do that legwork even before you start your immigration process. Start to build those connections, start to build those relationships, start to get those mentors and all of those supports that you need, so that when it's time for you to actually make the move, you have at least prospects lined up, or persons who can. One of your panelists just now said he's open to referring persons into a role. That is critical as you navigate the international market. So those are some of the things that will really help you to transition seamlessly into a different marketplace.
Lovely. I know as you kind of mentioned the transition now. So what I want us to do for this discussion is kind of break it up into parts in terms of what's the process like before or getting prepared to leave. So in terms of what are the documents I need to get ready, how do I apply? Not only for jobs, but also in terms of you migrating. I want to talk about as well the in the moment. So now I'm here. So what's next? And then from that, the kind of a future outlook. So coming over to you, Oliver, I'd just like to find out what is the process in terms of migrating. So what does that look like?
Well, it really depends. For purposes of this meeting, I think we're talking more on the business and professional side. So one of the ways that is used by US companies and employers is what's called the H-1B visa. And I believe Mr. Davis also made mention to it during his previous presentation. So the H-1B is one of the work visas that can be used for those interested in going abroad to work. A quick summary of what is required is generally the H-1B visa is a visa that requires an individual to have a 4-year college degree or its equivalent. An employer who wishes to employ the individual in a job that requires a 4-year college degree or its equivalent, and that the employer is willing to pay what is called a prevailing wage, which is established by the US Department of Labor. If you have those general factors, then the issue will become the actual application process itself. Depending upon how much you'd like me to speak about it, I can. But I also noticed that you said to get about getting yourself ready to go. So maybe I will skip a bit and say that individuals who are hoping to go overseas can do some important groundwork before they get to the level of being interviewed at the embassy or consular post. And that is to make sure that they have either the original or certified copy of their birth certificate, a valid passport, that is issued obviously by the appropriate authority. And the other thing is they need to do some due diligence on their own. And what I mean by that is they need to make sure that they have not experienced any difficulties with law enforcement in their native or home country, because if they have, that could be a basis for inadmissibility after going through all of this. The other thing is that they obviously want to make sure that they are in good health. And then the other issue that has come up quite frequently, unfortunately, is, but I think it's easing back and it probably will be less of one with the current Biden administration, is obviously you have to be careful about which controlled substances you choose to participate or use before you go for interviews, because sometimes there's a medical exam called for, and if the medical exam detects anything, that can be a basis for denial of a visa without even getting any further, because from the US perspective, if you have indication of drug use, then what they will do is they will immediately determine, well, you're a known drug user, which may be highly unfair and inappropriate. So that's what I can say about background. Now, if you would like, I can expand a little bit more about the H-1B requirements, or if you want to come back to me, however you wish to do, let me know, sir.
Definitely. So what I want to know some more about is the requirements in terms of for the H1B, and also what it looks like for persons who wouldn't have a 4-year degree, or persons who are entrepreneurs who are looking not necessarily to be employed, but to basically to set up shop, so to speak. What does it look like for those specific group of people?
Okay, let me start with the last one. The entrepreneur is very interesting. I don't know if you're aware, but Jamaica and the US signed a bilateral agreement in 1997 for e-status. And what that means is that a Jamaican who possesses a Jamaican passport is eligible to get what's called an investor visa or an E2 visa. So that means an entrepreneur could invest in the United States, whether they invest in a business that is active and ongoing, or they choose to develop and found their own business. And by virtue of that, they will be able to get an E2 visa, which will allow them to live and work in the United States, and will allow spouses and children under 21 also to live and work in the United States. It's not readily known because much of the migration that obviously occurs out of Jamaica tends to be family-wise. Obviously, there is some business migration in the H category that I'll get to, but the e-visa is a very attractive way for entrepreneurs to come in. Question obviously will be as well, how much is the investment? That depends on the nature of the business. The Department of State uses what's called not only a marginality test, but they also use a test as what is the necessity to invest in a business. So if you're buying a car dealership or investing in a car dealership, you might need $2 million. But if you're opening a small business, which, for example, a very specialized catering business, you may need 100,000. What I generally tell clients is you need about $150,000 US to invest, and then you will be able to get the e-visa. But investment has many components. It can consist of obviously money, it can consist of inventory, it can consist of equipment. So it's a total package. It's not just plain cash. The money has to be placed at commercial risk. And that means, which many people ask me, well, what if I just put $200,000 in a US bank? Haven't I invested? Yes, you have, but you haven't invested by putting the money at commercial risk. So you have to put the money at commercial risk, and you have to show that you control the money, it was your money, and that you will manage and direct the enterprise. What's interesting about the e-visa is you don't have to be at the business every day. If you hire a manager or management team, well, you can just maybe check in the morning or check in every other day and go from there. So that's the e-visa. Returning to the H, with the H, you do generally need the 4-year college degree or its equivalent. It is going to be very difficult to get an H if you do not have that. Now, the H regulations do provide for substituting in work experience for college, but it is a difficult road to go down, and what you find is that United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which usually adjudicate these type of petitions, start to push back a lot. But generally what you'd have to do is you have to have between 3 and 4 years of work experience for each year of college you don't have. So that's how you would do this, the substituting. What I can tell you is the US market is quite dynamic at the moment. And because the US economy seems to be on the verge of starting to get into full stride, almost like our great Usain Bolt, it is a good time to think about trying to get into the market and apply. And what I can tell you is that my experience has been many US employers are very favorable towards Jamaican and Caribbean workers because in many instances, those individuals turn out to be high value employees. They work extremely hard and they bring exceptional talent. As we all know, I think the saying is most appropriate. We look about to Talawa, and that comes through every single time with many of the professionals that I have had the pleasure of representing. Especially of interest now in the US is science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEMs. But those aren't the only individuals who would be able to get into the US through the H-1B visa process. Regarding the H-1B process, generally what you have is USCIS has refined the process. In the past, usually what happened is, first of all, there are 65,000 visas available every year for H-1B applicants. The problem with that is there are far more jobs for individuals than the 65,000 visas. Just imagine what Silicon Valley and the tech companies want alone. So usually you will have in excess of 100,000 applicants. So what they used to do is they used to have a lottery process whereby what you would do is on a certain date, they would start accepting applications and you'd have to send in the entire application for the H-1B, and then you would have to basically cross your fingers, pray, whatever the case may be, and hope you are chosen. And that put a lot of burden on the employer and the employees. Now what they've done is they've gone from 2020 approximately going forward, they do what's called electronic registration. So what the employee do now is they go online electronically, they fill out some limited information, they pay a $10 filing fee, and they do that within a set period of time. It depends. Each year USCIS designates the period. It's usually a 2-week period. If you are successfully chosen, they notify you electronically, and then they invite you within 90 days after notifying you that you've been one of the selected entrants that you can apply. Now, they still use the lottery system. So in the sense that if the registration process where you pay the $10 for, if there are more than 65,000, then obviously they use a lottery process for that. But at least they're not putting you through the whole process. One other important point is that it's 65,000 visas for the 4-year college degree. There are an additional 20,000 visas available for those individuals that possess master's degrees. And so that's important because those jobs are there, and there sometimes are more jobs, there are more visas available for those jobs because, again, you have to, as the employer, prove that the minimum entry level requirement is the master's, which does exist, but it's different from obviously a 4-year college degree. Assuming all goes well and you are selected and then your case is approved, what will happen is then that you will be approved for the H-1 visa, and then you get it for 3 years. You can get it for an additional 3 years, so you can get up to 6 years. And if you're applying for your green card, which you can do pretty much during the first 3 years, but you're waiting because processing is taking a while, they will continue to give you H status in 1-year increments until you get your green card. So in some cases, sometimes an employer waits until 5.5 years in and says, oh, you know what, man, we're going to file for this person because they're really good, or they just strung the employee along, and then you can still get it. So sometimes you're in H status for 6, 7, 8 years.
But
So
just before we go on to the process or explaining more about the green card, I just want to bring in the Canadian side of the coin now to understand what it is like in a Canadian context in terms of getting the processes that would be, or the steps to take in terms of what are the options, how do we get to these options, and what would be the process in general.
Thank you. So the process, just like Oliver explained, would really depend on what the person is trying to come to Canada to do. For most skilled immigrants, right now, the system to go through is express entry or provincial nominations. And so you would have to meet the requirements for the specific programs. Express entry is pretty much a database that houses all the persons that want to immigrate as skilled immigrants to Canada. So that includes persons in trades, persons who have Canadian experience or would have gone to Canada to study, as well as regular skilled workers, which are not necessarily people working with their hands, as we would call it in Jamaica, but the accountants, the HR professionals, the engineers. Those would fall under the category of federal skilled worker. And so each program has specific requirements that the applicant must meet. This Express Entry program is a points based system, or what people would refer to as a lottery system. And so you must meet specific requirements for those programs. They usually involve age, education, work experience, family ties, or other relations in Canada, whether or not you have a valid job offer in Canada. So there are various factors that they look at to see if you're eligible for any of these programs. And then once you get into the database, then you would be invited for a invitation to apply for permanent residence. If it is that your score is high enough, once you're selected and you receive that invitation, that's when you start to submit an application for permanent residence. And of course, that comes with its own requirements, right? And would usually involve things like medical, police record, biometrics, as all other requirements as well. And so once you've submitted that permanent residence application, and if you are successful, then once you land in Canada, you have your PR status.
So just to kind of backtrack a bit, is it a case where we have to make an application for permanent residence, or can I make an application to just work in Canada and then go for an application for permanent residence?
So Express Entry is direct for immigration, so direct for permanent residence. If you want to go through a process to get a work permit, then there are other programs. You can get a work permit and then go through Express Entry. So Canada has over 100 different immigration pathways. So there are multiple programs that require to get a work permit, such as caregiver program. There are other programs such as other labor market impact assessment. I think I joined when someone asked the question what that is, right? So in most instances, for a foreign national, so for a Jamaican person to get a job in Canada, they must have a valid job offer, and that job offer is deemed valid when it meets specific requirements. And one of those would be a labor market impact assessment. Now, what that is pretty much is an employer in Canada proving to the government of Canada that we've tried to fill this role. There were no Canadian citizens, there were no permanent residents that we found suitable to do this job. And so we must go to the international market. They would have to submit an application and get a positive labor market impact assessment, and in some cases a neutral one, but pretty much that authorizes them to hire a foreign national. If a job offer is supported by an LMIA, then the person can submit an application for a work permit. And once they get that, then of course the visa, and they can come to Canada and work.
Okay. So I guess two other questions that I want to pull out just before we go back to Oliver is how does a LMIA affect in terms of the job prospect or the job market for persons in Jamaica or the region? And also what are some of the don'ts or don'ts, application don'ts that really affect your chances of getting into getting the status of permanent residence?
So most roles or most jobs that Jamaicans will go after are usually LMI required. And so the chances of you securing a job without a LMIA is slim. Are they hard to get? It really depends on what the market looks like. So for example, right now, because of COVID, the people who would most likely get an LMIA are persons in healthcare and who are essential workers providing very specific services that would benefit Canada at this time. Of course, that is because of the pandemic. In a lot of instances, persons in tech, Oliver mentioned it, STEM is the place to be right now. And you guys really talked about technology and so on in your previous session. So those persons are at the top of the tier right now for getting work permits, and even are preferred in terms of getting permanent residence based on specific provincial nomination programs.
Okay, so that's it. So just to kind of bring back Oliver in the conversation now, just before we move back to Nadisha, we're kind of opening up the floor to the conversation around the green card and what that looks like in terms of after getting into America, into the job. So now we kind of want to bring that back in terms of what's the process like. How does, as a Jamaican about to make this application, how do I make myself, or what's the application process like, and what can I do to make or to even enhance that application? How does the employer affect that? So just to kind of bring an overview of what it's like.
So if an individual has an H-1 visa and the employer wishes to sponsor them, then the employer can agree with the employee to proceed. And what needs to be done is, it's called, in the US, it's called PERM. It used to be called labor certification. And very similar to what Nadisha was saying is, what will have to be done is, one of the first steps is the employer has to demonstrate that that particular job that that individual is doing is in short supply, and therefore they need a certification from the US Department of Labor that the job is in short supply so that the individual is needed. And the steps are basically that you have to advertise. And so you advertise in either a journal or a newspaper that is common to the industry. And then you actually have to do a recruitment process. And this is where it's tricky, because you cannot just simply design a job specifically for the employee. So for example, you couldn't say, well, we need an employee that speaks Patois. Although it's a very important language and needed, it's not going to work. So you'd have to come up with the proper skill set. And then if there were any American workers who applied, unfortunately, then you have to give them the opportunity to interview. And if you decide to exclude them, you have to have good reason. And if you have to show this to the Department of Labor. If you get past that, and the job is certified as in short supply, then the employer can file what's called an I-140 petition for immigrant or alien worker. And if that's approved, then you go to the final step, which is to apply for your permanent residence or green card. That's how it would be. Now, although it doesn't affect a lot of people, there are some individuals who may come into the US, for example, highly qualified Jamaicans or Caribbean people who, if they come in, for example, as distinguished professors or lecturers, they may not need to go through the PERM process. And for example, I was privileged to represent a Jamaican woman who was highly qualified as a hydrologist, and she was able to apply directly for her green card through what was called the exceptional ability, or EB1 category, where you basically presented to the US government and said, look, these are my qualifications, and you list awards, teaching, etc., and you can then self-petition for yourself. But the majority of workers have to go through that PERM process. And at the end, if they get through, then they will have a green card, and then it will be helpful. The reason you do it is you only have 6 years of H eligibility. So it doesn't suit an employer to wait too long or just use up, because once you finish your H eligibility, the employer cannot just turn around and file for another H for you. Current immigration law requires then you be outside the United States for 365 days before you qualify again for an H, or 1 year.
Okay, that sounds understand. Fair enough, especially in terms of the context of doing the LMIA and understanding what are the options here. But is it a case where you'd have to do an LMIA before getting the H visa, or is it that the LMIA comes in place whenever you're moving on into residency?
Well, I'm not sure about, forgive me, the LMIA, because I believe that's for Nadisha. I think what you're referring to is the PERM, in other words, the labor cert process.
Yes.
So the answer is you generally first, if the worker is in the US in H1 capacity, they're first in that capacity, and then you do the PERM process. But let me stop you and say this. An employer could have a Jamaican employee that they think is really good and qualified, and they could do the PERM process first, but that means the employee or the potential employee remains in Jamaica, and then once they're approved for their green card, then the US Embassy is notified and they go in for an immigrant interview. Instead of it through family, it's through employment, so it can be done. Some employers don't like to do that because the process can take a couple years, so they lose the benefit of the value of the employee in their workforce. Now, with what's happened with COVID-19 and the virtual world and Zoom and everything, I'm seeing more and more employers willing to say, you know what, we will engage the services of a qualified employee and we will do the perm at the same time, but we can have them work and they can appear by Zoom or send their work electronically. So in today's world, it may be a more attractive option because also with the previous Trump administration and some of, I'm sorry, but the best I can say is some of the utter stupidness they did. They were preventing individuals from coming to the US and they were only cutting off their nose to spite their face. And so what has happened is employers have had to be creative.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing that. One of the things I want to go back to Nadisha with now is kind of focusing more on what are the prospects currently. I hear you mention the essential workers, but what are some of the prospects at the moment and you foresee for about the next year or two, and how can we prepare ourselves to take up opportunities of this nature? Also, for everybody who may have questions, you can start getting your questions ready so that we can get those answered for you.
So the prospects. So Canada for 2021 to 2023 has the target of immigrating 1.2 million persons to Canada. And the majority of those persons will come from the express entry or economic streams. The numbers are ranging between 100 to 200 plus persons just through those streets. And so this is the time for economic immigrants. So at the base, most persons coming into the express entry pool or the express entry database must, as we mentioned, meet the specific requirements above. At the minimum, you must have 1 year work experience continuous in your field. So as an example, if you just finished your degree in accounting and you did a 1 year work experience at PricewaterhouseCoopers, you have the perfect age because you're young, you have the work experience and so on. You're a perfect candidate to go in express entry. Each province has in-demand occupation, and so the fields that are in demand will vary depending on where in Canada you're looking to go. So in Ontario, tech is the thing. Ontario has the biggest tech industry in Canada. So if you're in tech, Ontario is the place for you to look out for. Again, each province has very specific requirements. There is one particular provincial nomination program, the Atlantic program, which they're focusing on other fields. They may be nursing and persons in healthcare. Those provinces are more remote, and you'd find that getting into these provinces are usually easier than getting into some of the more competitive places. Mark you, they are cold, very cold, but there are lots of opportunities in those provinces. And so when you think about what your next move is, it really depends on what your occupation is, where you want to go with your career, and also the why behind where you want to go. So if you have ties in Ontario or in another province, then that may influence your decision. But if you just want to get up and go on somewhere, then you may look at some of those other remote provinces because they may present better opportunities. So what I would say, if you are in university now, or if you're finishing up your studies or you're working, if you're interested in immigrating, now is the time to start the process because Canada is moving full speed ahead with meeting these numbers. What they've done this year is lower the points that they've been pulling from the pool. And due to the issue with the COVID-19 situation, they have not been able to take persons from outside Canada. So they've looked inward. So what you've had is then creating new pathways for persons who would otherwise be ineligible. So as an example, they've created new pathways for persons who are working in Canada now, persons who have studied in Canada, and so they would not have to wait the 1 year to get the work experience or so on that they would otherwise need to meet the Canadian experience class. So again, the prospects look really well. And just looking at Canada's birth rate, it will continue to grow because Canada has an aging population. A couple of years ago, it was 1 to 5. So for every one retiree, there were 5 skilled persons to take over. Now we're down to 1 to 3, and it's projected that by 2030, 30, it may go down to 1 to 2. So Canada is known for all the lovely social amenities, the free healthcare, the good pension plans, and so on. In order for them to maintain that, they have to do a little proxy scheme. And so they have to get people in so that they can maintain all of those lovely benefits. And so I think it will continue to grow because, again, the population is not growing at a fast enough pace to produce more workers, which is why express entry is a little bit biased towards younger persons, because they want persons to come and stay longer in the workforce so that they can afford those persons coming out to reap the benefits for all the years that they've served in the Canadian marketplace.
So just before I go back to Oliver on what's the prospects like in the USA, I want to find out for persons who are looking to study, especially for those who have completed undergrad and looking to move into graduate studies. What's the prospect like for those persons in terms of the next step into the work world and also the next step into immigration after completing graduate studies? Still with you, Nadisha.
Oh, sorry. I totally missed that because I thought that was for Oliver.
Oh, no. I wanted to go back to Oliver about the job prospects in the USA, but just before I did that, I kind of wanted to find out what it's looking like for, well, education-wise, especially for persons who are looking to complete graduate studies. So what is it in terms of after completing studies, how do I move into, whether it is the work world or moving into immigration rights after completing those studies?
Okay. So before I jump into what that looks like, a lot of persons I know are now moving towards education or studying in Canada as their preference for getting their permanent residence. That stream is particularly attractive because of the prospects and because it requires less to get into the express entry pool. As an example, for persons that are older or for persons that may not have enough points to be selected in express entry, they may opt to go the route through education. In a lot of instances, persons also choose that route because it's one of the fastest ways to get to Canada. So you'll get to Canada sooner. So you'll start your relocation earlier. So after studying, after you successfully completed your studies, and you have gone to a designated learning institution, so there are very specific requirements that would afford you the opportunity to get what is known as a postgraduate work permit. You mentioned graduate studies. It may not necessarily be a master's. It could also be a postgraduate. It may also be a postgraduate diploma, which is usually a more cost-effective option for a lot of persons, as masters for international students are quite pricey. And so after studying, you would get a postgraduate work permit, which is tied, you'd have to apply for it, of course, which is tied to the length of your study. So if you do 1 year, you'll get a 1 year work permit. If you studied for at least 2 years, then you get a postgraduate work permit for a minimum of 3 years, a maximum of 3 years rather. Now, within that timeline, the idea is to, of course, secure a job. Once you've worked 1 year in Canada, you now become eligible to apply under the Canadian Experience class through Express Entry, which have lower requirements, so to speak, than it would if you were applying through the Federal Skilled Worker program or the Federal Skills Trade program. And so that is why it's so attractive for a lot of persons who want to eventually immigrate. It would be the same process once you get into the Express Entry pool. You would wait to be selected to get an invitation to apply for PR. Then you would, of course, submit all the relevant documentations, complete your application process, and then afterwards, if you were a successful applicant, then you would be given your permanent resident status.
Okay. All right. So guys, you heard it here first. Study in Canada. But before we move over to Oliver to kind of get an idea of the prospects, I realized that there were some questions coming in. However, the team had asked that for some of these questions, you can just go ahead and raise your hands, especially for those that are more specific. So you can just raise your hand and I'll identify you and you'll be able to ask your question. So over to you now, Oliver, on what it is looking like in terms of job prospects from a USA landscape.
Well, as I said earlier, the US economy, I think, is positioned to really grow rapidly. And so therefore, I think it looks very good. Interesting point to follow up on what Nadisha said. In approximately somewhere in 2020, the previous administration thought it might be very prudent to basically not allow any students to come to the US and study. Well, they got sued, and they got sued by Harvard and MIT and the likes of the, what you'd say is the big man. So what happened was they immediately had to back off. So what is happening is foreign students are able to come in. US consular posts are issuing student visas. In terms of the job market, there is a definite deficiency in STEM. And I can say with clarity that if students are interested in coming to the US to study STEM, they will find jobs when they're finished. And the beauty of it is the employers are regularly recruiting at the schools and the universities. An interesting point about if you choose to study STEM in the US, you are eligible to get a what's called OPT, optional practical training, which is a work permit. And that allows you to work, and you can work off campus for any employer. For STEM individuals, you can get up to 24 months. So that gives you 24 months to get familiar with various employers and for them to find a way to sponsor you. And if they have actually put in an application for an H and it's pending, but you have OPT, USCIS will extend your OPT to have it merge with the H application. Other workers obviously are welcome too, and I think that it's prime time because the Biden administration has a totally different view of immigration, and the worker shortage is there. And I'm not just talking about workers who would do, for example, some of the work that is maybe not of interest to the participants today, such as maybe hospitality or manual work, but there is substantial work in the IT sector, teachers, and education along with STEM. It is looking very positive, and the Biden administration is pushing this hard, and the US institutions recognize that they have lost more than a step. And while the previous administration was denying student visas right, left, and center, England, Germany, Australia, and everywhere else was basically waving their hand and saying, come in, come in, come in. So the US institutions lost some of the advantage they have, and now they're rapidly trying to make up. It is true that it's very expensive to come to the US to study because you get charged with the foreign student rate. But the schools do try to help in various ways. Sometimes there is on-campus employment you can get, etc. And depending upon how you interact with an employer, I have seen some employers say we might consider investing or help you to defray the cost of your education if you make a commitment to come to work for us.
Lovely. All right, guys. So we're just going to open up for questions now. So if there's anybody who have any questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand, and you'll be identified, and you can go ahead and ask your questions. Especially if your question is specific or is very pointed. Well, oh, okay. So I see a hand here from Rogerton Williams. So go ahead, Rogerton.
Good evening, everyone. A question for Nadisha, or Miss Berry. Miss Berry, is there like you mentioned Ontario for STEM. That's a good province to choose if you have an interest in STEM. Is there like a cost effective, a middle ground, somewhere, a city like that is probably very expensive. Or, well, better yet, my idea is actually to do a master's program in Canada. Is there like, I've researched about it, and I thank you so much for the helpful information you provided about doing a master's, getting a permit for the specific amount of time. Is there like an institution you would recommend? I'm not saying you're at marketing here, but I've seen quite a few institutions. I heard that community colleges can be cheaper, but I'm trying to select like a middle ground somewhere that's known to be more acceptable for those seeking to do a master's program, cost effective. I'm trying to do a STEM, doing computer science, if possible. Well, Do you recommend Ontario, or is there like a state you would recommend for, the best state, best province? Sorry for that.
There are quite a few questions in that one question, so just to kind of pull it
I'll
apart. So,
try to answer them all.
okay.
So, correct, Ontario is very expensive. Ontario and British Columbia are two of the most expensive provinces, but you'll also find that they are two of the most attractive provinces for international students. Ontario has specific express entry stream for master's graduates. And so that's one of the things that makes it so attractive. In terms of a particular institution, that's a hard one because there are quite a number of institutions in Ontario that are on, the creme de la creme list. University of Toronto being one of them. There's Ryerson University. There's York. There's so many schools. What you will find is that some of those institutions that are outside of the what we call the Greater Toronto area, those are usually more cost effective. So if you look in Hamilton or London, those schools are usually cheaper, but you will still get the same quality education that you would get, and they're reputable institutions as well. A lot of Jamaicans are in that region studying, and so it's also kind of very homely and somewhere that you would be easy to adapt to. So I wouldn't recommend a particular institution because again it really depends on what you are trying to study. You mentioned computer science, so one program may be more attractive than another, and so that may be determining factor because of what the program actually covers as opposed to just the cost factor. In terms of cost of living overall, the international student fees, I will be honest, are, as Oliver mentioned, in Canada, they're probably triple the cost of a permanent resident or a citizen. So for example, a master's program could cost you anywhere between 20 to 30 something thousand per year. And so you might look at that as well. There are scholarships available for international students. So that's something you want to tap into. Look at which schools offer entrance scholarships because that also makes it even more attractive for you to go to that institution. As I mentioned before, some of the more, remote areas in Ontario are more cost effective, not just for tuition, but in general cost of living. And so those areas I mentioned before, rent is usually cheaper, food is cheaper, transportation. In a lot of areas, you don't even need to take the bus to go to school. You can literally walk because the area is full of student residents. And so those are some of the factors to consider as opposed to just the cost of tuition. In Toronto, I can tell you rent costs a fortune. You probably have to to save up for days just to find a proper place to live. And that's just the reality. It's not to dissuade you, but you have to be prepared for what you're stepping into. Sharing housing is also a good option to save some money. So finding areas where you can share housing is also a good opportunity to crunch back. And yeah, so those are some of the options that I would suggest. I hope I answered all of your questions.
You basically did. Mr. Barrett, can I also uh, target a question to Oliver as well?
Sure. Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening, Oliver. Thanks for the knowledge you've endowed so far. Um, so in the US for a master's program, let's see, you mentioned that STEM was quite the attractive solution so far if you want to study or let's say work abroad. In your opinion, the easiest method, would that be the education route or try your luck in the H1? I forgot the name of that visa to
Mhm.
work abroad, basically with a company. They do the application and you do that approach.
That's a good question, sir. Thank you for it. I think you can be creative here. So obviously, there is the need for good quality employees. So if you already have a four-year college degree or its equivalent, you might well qualify for an H1. So one option might be is to see if you can get the employer to sponsor you, pay for the H1. Now you're in the US. And then you can negotiate with the employer. And because the universities and the institutions are flexible and understand the modern working environment, you might be able to then do the master's in the evening or on the weekends or virtually, and then acquire the master's while working for the employer. And the employer might either give you some financial help, or you might be able to use the earned income in the US to pay for it. But I've seen some employers be very flexible and support their employees, especially if their employees will then want to continue to work for them. I do concede that coming to the US just for education, if you don't get some financial help, it is definitely expensive. And the universities do hit foreign students with substantially higher fees than if you were a resident, either green card holder, US citizen, etc. Becomes a little more of an issue if you are in the US, you have an H1, and you're working for a company. I had a client once that I tried to make the argument, well, my client's a resident because my client is living in this state, working, and why wouldn't you give them the resident fee? Well, there was a boxing match for a while with the university or the institution, but ultimately they didn't completely concede, but they reduced the foreign student fee that they would charge by 60%. So it was somewhat of a victory. So that's how I would answer your question, sir.
Thank you so much. That's a substantial decrease. Do you have any tips on how to find the best employers, or where we can go as immigrants to,
Well, I think this evening, sir.
I don't mean to cut in, guys,
Sir?
but Rogerton, can we have other persons ask question, please? I appreciate the questions, but this is the last one, and then we have to move on, okay?
No problem, ma'am. Thank you so much.
I think this evening you've gotten some excellent tips. And what I would say is, I think if you network within this group, you will probably get some good ideas about who good employers are. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a gentleman who is actually working with Apple, and he indicated in the last session that he would be open to being communicated with. You might try with him, and I think he might be a superb starting point.
All right, so just before we go to Nicola, who I see have a raised hand, I'm just going to ask this question here. So there's a question from Janelle. She's saying that she's an econ major, and after her degree and work experience, or gaining work experience, she wants to know how difficult or easy it will be applying for express entry into Canada.
All right, so Janelle, and I see quite a number of questions in the chat regarding express entry, so I'll try to answer as much of them as I can here and now. So as I mentioned before, express entry is not an application, quote unquote, it is a database. So when you create a profile, you go into the database, it is not an application. So getting into express entry is not the application itself. If you think about express entry like a house, when you get into the front door, you have to wait for someone to open one of the other doors for you. So express entry is the house. When you meet the eligibility requirements to get in through the front door, you have other doors that you want to go through. One would be the federal skilled worker, the Canadian experience class, the federal skills trade, or a provincial nomination program. So there are 4 doors there. Now, you must meet the requirement for at least one of those programs to remain in the lobby or the waiting room or the living room in that house. If you get an invitation to apply for PR, then you submit an application. So getting into the express entry database, or the express entry pool as it is called, is not an application. It's simply what you would describe as an expression of an interest. So you're saying to Canada, I am a skilled worker. I meet the requirements for this particular program. If Canada selects you from the pool based on your comprehensive ranking score, so that's the points-based thing, then you would submit an application for your permanent residence. So to answer your question, Janelle, if you've met the requirements for a particular program, so let's say with your econ degree and you have a 1-year work experience, then you would be able to get into the pool if all the other factors are met. Then you would get into the express entry pool. You'll be given a comprehensive ranking score. So the system, the algorithm will look at your profile and assign a score to you based on the information that you provided. Once that is done, you have your profile is valid for 1 year. Within that 1 year, you would want to try to get more points if your points are low, to be able to increase the probability of you getting an invitation to apply for permanent residence. Now, before anyone can get into the express entry pool, there are two things that they would need to meet. And I'm going on the assumption that everyone on this call is either Caribbean or Jamaican and they've never gone to school, nor have they worked in Canada. And so what that means is that you would have to do an education credential assessment, which is known as an ECA, and that is valid for 5 years. You would have to do that. And what that is pretty much taking your degree from Jamaica, getting it assessed, or whatever other credential you have, whether it's a diploma, a master's, a PhD, whatever it is. You would take all your credentials, you would get those official transcripts sent over to one of the designated credentialing bodies. There are quite a number of them. World Education Services West is one of the most popular ones. You'd pay the fee to get those assessed. If your degree equates to a degree in Canada or whatever credential you went after, one checkbox. The other issue is that you would need to meet language requirements. Now, irrespective of the fact that English is our first language, every person immigrating to Canada through economic immigration must meet specific language requirements. Janelle, based on your degree and your work experience, you would most likely be eligible for Federal Skilled Worker Program. And so you would have to meet the Canadian benchmark of CLB 7, which means that you have to get 7 or above in your IELTS test or your CELPIP test. Those are the two official tests. And there's also TOEFL, I believe is the other one. IELTS is the only one that is offered in Jamaica through UE. And so you would have to complete that examination, meet the requirements based on the language benchmark, and get your credentials assessed. Once you've done those two things successfully, then you can enter the express entry database. And then from there, it's may the points be in your favor.
So in other words, you'll have to do your best and then leave it up to the points to do the rest. But just before we wrap up, what I want to kind of bring in here now is to find out what's like that one space where we can go to find all these information, and then also how can we connect with you in terms of what the services that you guys provide and how can we access those. So we'll start with Oliver.
Oh, thank you. Well, anybody wants to reach me, I'm happy to speak to individuals, and the easiest way is to reach me by email. So it would be Langstadt, my last name, at langstadtlaw.com. That's the easiest way. Or you may call me at 305-648-3909. This St. Mary man tends to keep it simple, so I don't really have a social media presence and so forth, and Instagram and thatgram and thisgram. I welcome the chance to speak to everyone. The services I offer are all services related to immigration. I love helping people, being that I took the journey myself, and I especially love helping fellow Jamaicans and my Caribbean people. And usually it turns out that my fellow Jamaicans and Caribbean people usually give me the most entertaining cases, because there's always some kind of Anansi story involved with Jamaicans coming to migrate to the US. Thank you so much.
Okay, Oliver. And for you, Nadisha.
Oliver, I will agree with you that when I get Jamaican clients or inquiries, there's always a story behind the story, which people are not usually forthcoming with. You have to do those probing questions to get to the real issue.
Yes.
So the easiest way to contact me is on LinkedIn. I'm there 247 at my name, Nadisha Berry. Connect, follow. I'm usually very responsive on LinkedIn. I'm there for work, so it's easy for you to get me there. Otherwise, you can hit me up by email at info@nbcaimmigration.com, or sorry, that's my email, or nbcaimmigration.com to find me. But if you go to LinkedIn, I'll share all the information that you need there.
And just before we bring back Aishiba on stage, on the virtual stage, I just want you guys to kind of tell us exactly, or tell us a few of the services that you would offer, just so that the participants don't feel lost in terms of what to reach out for. So what would some of those services be? We'll start with Oliver and then go to Nadisha.
Well, first of all, I am versed in all aspects of immigration. So I talk to individuals about all aspects. And as it comes up, obviously, individuals will ask me about the cultural differences and adjusting to the US. What I pride myself in is that I'm very protective of my fellow Jamaicans and Caribbean people. So when they come to me and they start saying, well, so and so said this, so and so said that, I am very cautious and I tell them, let's be careful here. And I try to make sure that I give them very good, clear, logical advice. And then I refer them if they need help from other professionals. But they can consult me on all aspects of immigration, and they can also consult with me on all aspects of Florida law because I'm licensed in Florida. So if there are particular Florida issues, US is a little different. So each one of the states you have to be licensed in, except for immigration. For immigration purposes, I am licensed nationwide in the 50 states because immigration is federal. But other individual things like buying a house or doing a business in another state, they might have to speak to a lawyer in another state. But individuals can consult with me on all aspects of immigration, Florida law. And if they have general questions about what's going on in the US, I'm happy to try to give them guidance because I think that's the right thing to do. And I like to try to be helpful.
Awesome. So that's Oliver, our personal USA correspondent that we can reach out to for all things immigration or all things on what's happening in the USA.
Yes.
And for you, Nadisha, what are some of those points or specific services that we can reach out to you for?
All right. So this is the part where I say I wore. This is the part where I come again and tell you that I wear many hats. So you can reach out to me for all things careers, especially careers in Canada. So that's one. I didn't share the details for that company there, but once you find me, you can get all the information that you need as it relates to that. Particularly for immigration, I do all aspects of immigration, but my favorite is for skilled immigrants. So I specialize a lot in economic immigration. So that's your express entry, your provincial nomination program, your caregiver programs, and all the other economic immigration. I am very open to answering questions persons may have, so you can reach out to me. Again, just like Oliver, you know it go, you look out for your fellow Yardie. So I have right now a huge network of international students, persons who are in the process immigrating, and persons who have immigrated that I keep in my network and that I connect them to other persons who either are in similar occupations or in similar processing so that they can lend support and just share their experiences because that is usually very helpful. Again, like Oliver mentioned, there are a lot of misconceptions as it relates to immigration. Right now, Canada is very attractive, and so there is a lot of scamming going on as it relates to persons who are unregulated who are promoting immigration in Canada, and I assume perhaps in the USA. Ensure that if you are being represented by someone, they are licensed Canada to collect fees to support persons with any immigration process, whether it's consultation or submitting applications. You must be a regulated profession, so whether a lawyer or a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. So you can check with the regulatory bodies to search that person up. So if you go now to IRCC and you search for my name, you will find me. So that's one thing you have to be wary of. I will also share that nobody, and Oliver will back me up on this, nobody can give you a designated timeline, a guaranteed outcome for any immigration process. So you have to be wary of that as well. Persons who promise you that you must get the job or you must get the visa or you must get that, they're operating underneath the law and you don't want to work with those persons. So as I said before, hit me up. I'll be happy to assist and support you guys. As I mentioned, I consult in all the areas. Just like Oliver, I'm restricted in where I can practice. So immigration in Canada has its restrictions. So I cannot practice in Quebec and in some cases in Saskatchewan and another province that is also regulated differently. But outside of that, I'm across Canada.
Awesome, love that. So we have our correspondents from America and from Canada, our go-to persons. Just before we say bye-bye, I see Mark Anthony Jones have a question, so I'll just allow him to go ahead and then we'll just finish up from there.
Yeah, good night. I was able to ask this before, but Nadisha, for let's say I have a 1 year degree. I mean, I have a degree and I have 1 year work experience in tech, right? what's the process for me to go to Canada, like to work?
So again, each person's situation is going to be different. So the degree and the work experience are not the only factors to be considered when you think about the most viable option for you. So off the bat, based on information you presented, express entry, in addition to provincial nomination, would be viable options for you. You could also go the route of trying to get a work permit. Obviously, you need an LMIA for that. So those are some of the immediate options that come to mind.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So thank you both so much. I mean, for me, it was really not only eye-opening, but also really insightful in terms of the information here today. I think everybody can really use some of the information, not only, or maybe even not for themselves, but for somebody else. And also, I think having you guys as point persons is also a plus. So thank you so much for allowing us into your space and to connect with you, and also to reach out to you whenever it is that we need anything from the USA or from Canada. So thank you guys so much, and also thank you for being here today.
Thank you.